And the Prophet ﷺ instructed every believer to do this, that we have to be really careful of what we say. And he said, all of the speech of the son of Adam is against him and not for him, except commanding the good and forbidding the wrong and remembering Allah Azza wa Jal. So other than that, we got to be careful, because if you talk a lot, you'll slip a lot. And if you slip a lot, you'll sin a lot with the billah ta'ala, and that will ruin your good deeds. The Prophet ﷺ mentioned on the night of Isra and Mi'raj, he saw a bull come out of like a little tiny hole, and then this person was trying to stuff it back in, and he couldn't. And he asked what that was, and Jibril told him, that's a person who says a horrible thing, and then he's unable to take it back. So iqrar, talking about someone's rights, calumny, carrying tales, backbiting, all of those things, it's like a bullet. Once you squeeze the trigger and it comes out the barrel, that's that. You can't retract it. In the case of iqrar, you make iqrar, you owe someone money. You make iqrar, you might make a statement that renders your contract invalid. Even if somebody's intoxicated, they can make iqrar. One word can make you enter Islam, one statement, and one statement could remove you from Islam, waliyadu billah ta'ala. One word or one statement in the presence of a wali and witnesses, that's the difference between fornication and lawful marriage. And one statement from an angry husband who can't control his tongue, that's a divorce. You know what I'm saying? And that's like another area where you got to control your tongue. Iqrar, nowadays, not a lot of people are going to make iqrar. They're not going to make admissions of guilt, and we don't have a magistrate anyway. But what people do, and I've dealt with like 2 or 3 of them in the last that many months. People divorce their wives and then regret it. You could be like, oh, I'm just angry. I was angry. I didn't know. Miss me with that. That's a legal statement with ramifications between the person and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And one of the things like they teach in circles of knowledge is never bring up the D word. Between the spouses, when they're arguing or disagreeing, to never bring up the D word. And even like when they'll mention, like if we get to the point, and Allah bless us in this trip or others, to study marital rulings and divorce, like even when they'll mention examples, they'll never say in the first person. The sheikh wouldn't say, he divorced his wife. He'll always say it in the third person, just to show how distant you should be from that statement. And another big issue that we have to convey with respect to controlling one's tongue is, one pronouncement of divorce equals 1 divorce, and 2 equals 2, and 3 equals 3 divorces, even at one time, by the consensus of the 4 Sunni schools of thought. And it's a common misunderstanding that happens a lot, and people divorce their wives 3 times without knowing it. He'll say he divorces her, but he would say it in the third person, and she in the second person. That threefold divorce is irrevocable. And again, people, then they'll be writing us emails, they'll be emailing them saying, oh, I divorced her, we have kids. You needed to control your tongue. You know what I'm saying? Same thing, iqrar. You need to control your tongue. Some things, whether it's serious or joking, it counts. And then like iqrar is like that, marriage is like that, divorce is like that. One has to weigh one's tongue and control it. And statements have significant, serious ramifications. So in this case, we're dealing with monetary rights or penal code. But in the case of marital ahkam as well, it's a big deal. And also in the case of like even statements that can be construed as apostasy, you can bring yourself into the deen or take yourself out of the deen just by one thing you say. So we need to control our tongues and also circulate knowledge of that. Here, it's not likely that people are going to make admissions that entail punishment or monetary expense, but an area we got to really circulate a good understanding is the area of divorce. That people will slip and divorce their wives, and then cases will come and they'll find out they've been divorced for 10 years. You know what I'm saying? I mean, people will say crazy stuff. They'll say, you're divorced 100 times, in a state of fit of rage. Forget it. Once someone does that, they can't take it back. I mean, she has to finish her waiting period, remarry, be divorced by the other husband, finish her waiting period from him, and get remarried before they can be lawfully married again. So it's a big deal, and we have to control our tongues. That's something of a digression, but that type of statement is more relevant to our circumstance than perhaps iqrar. Inshallah, we'll finish this up. He goes on to the conditions. So there are conditions with admissions that make them valid. And these are typically conditions, and we've seen them, they're implied from other areas that we've covered, though we'll come over them again. 3 characteristics are necessary in order for the admission to be valid. The one making the admission must be mature. So a child, even a discerning child, if they say, oh yeah, I owe someone $50, I gave Zainab my toy, and they're like 10 years old, and they've not had something that makes them reach maturity as defined by the sacred law, that admission doesn't count. And as we said, someone who's hasn't reached maturity, when we discussed selling, they're mislub al-ibara. Their statements don't have legal ramifications in the sacred law typically, except in certain circumstances like giving a present or allowing someone to come in the door or something like that. So a child who's not reached maturity, they can't make iqrar. Now, what about their admission of maturity? You know, a child says, I've had nocturnal emission, or I've menstruated. We accept that from them, and if they've reached the point where that could possibly happen, which is 900 years approximately. So if a girl, for instance, says, now I'm menstruating, then we accept that statement from her without her swearing an oath. That they be of sound mind. So the iqrar of an insane person doesn't count, as neither does the iqrar of someone whose intellect has been removed by an artificial substance that they didn't transgress in its consumption. So someone is under anesthesia, for instance. Their iqrar doesn't count. They have heavy pain medication that they need. Their iqrar doesn't count. Someone who gets drunk, forget it. Their iqrar counts, their divorce counts out of a punishment for that. So out of as a deterrent from intoxication and drinking those substances, the sacred law holds them responsible for the statements they make at that point. So someone divorces their wife in a state of drunkenness, that counts. They say, this car is actually so-and-so's. Forget it, it's not their car anymore. You know what I'm saying? Because they made that statement, even though they were intoxicated, but they shouldn't have been intoxicated. So we hold them responsible for that. While if they did it when they were under anesthesia, for instance, or they get their wisdom teeth out and they've got laughing gas and they say something they shouldn't, that we wouldn't hold them responsible for. But in the case of wrongful intoxication, we hold them responsible. And also that they be free from coercion. And that's for obvious reasons. And that applies generally. There's conditions, though, for coercion, that again, if Allah blesses us in our study and lifespan, inshallah ta'ala, if we cover divorce, there are conditions for coercion not counting, but someone who's coerced, their iqrar doesn't count. And for instance, you can't beat someone into a confession of something, and Allah protect us from that. Then there's a fourth condition if it concerns monetary rights or marriage. And he said, if it concerns property, then a fourth condition is considered. That's property or marriage. One making the declaration must be rational. And you'll remember when we dealt with suspensions, we dealt with a person who was suspended due to being foolhardy, that they couldn't maintain their religion or their monetary affairs properly. So that person isn't allowed to engage in transactions on their own behalf. Similarly, they're not allowed to make an admission of a monetary due themselves, because they're not rational. They're considered foolhardy and they can't manage their own affairs. So we don't accept their iqrar. So those are four conditions for iqrar: maturity, soundness of mind, or you could say intellect, not being coerced, and in the case of property and also marital rulings, that they have to have their reason, that be rational, meaning they can properly maintain their religious affairs as well as their monetary affairs. He goes on, if one admits to something unspecific, he is asked for clarification. So if he says, I owe Amir Sundiatas If he says he owes,